what are the kinds of foods that you feel people are consuming that are leading to those spikes and crashes unbeknownst to them? So one of them we've already mentioned was oats and oat milk, I think, which is a great sort of starting point given how popular it is. What are some of the other culprits that perhaps people don't really recognize at this point?
Fruit smoothies.
Oh, yeah.
So all those innocent smoothies you find at the train station, and it says healthy on it and no added sugars. But actually, if you know how to decipher it all, you realize that's just sugar water. Even if it's orange and it looks innocent, it's not. So those, any sort of breakfast foods or breakfast bars, I think those are not great, especially if you have them first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
Those cereal bars with dates, etc., and rice syrup, etc. If you have that for breakfast, it's going to create a big spike. I think, my pet peeve are the food items that people think are healthy, and marketing is very convincing, but actually are really bad for you and your glucose levels. For example, if you look at a chocolate muffin, everybody knows that has sugar in it, that's a dessert. But if you look at a fruit smoothie or an oat milk something or an acai bowl or a granola bar, you might not know that actually it's causing a big spike in your system. And everybody is trying to make healthy choices. And most people who drink, for example, fruit juices or fruit smoothies, they are doing that because they truly believe that that is good for them. And the marketing is very believable. Yeah. So that's really what I'm trying to fix here. The issue of food products pretending to be healthy, but actually being really unhealthy. If you look at a chocolate, for example, there's no trick going on there. There's no label on the chocolate bar that says, oh, gluten-free, no added sugar, good for your heart. It's chocolate. Yeah. It's a chocolate bar. Yeah. People know that it's sweet. Yeah. The ones that I hate are the ones with the misleading marketing. And we need to teach people from the ground up, but we also need more regulation in the food industry so that ultra-processed food products cannot put on the label stuff that seemingly makes them look healthy.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think it's so easy to be duped, even if you are educated around food and you feel like you're reasonably educated enough to recognize what is good and bad, you can still get tripped up. Yeah. One of the pet peeves I have, and I saw this actually at the airport, are these sort of like immunity shots, right? So, ginger and turmeric and all the rest of it, it's got those sort of like highlighted on the label. In reality, those only constitute less than 20%. And what's the majority of it is apple juice. It's just apple juice every time. And I always read it and I'm like, this is just pure sugar. Yeah. And like, fair enough, it's a tiny shot. So the impact of that is going to be less than if it was a full sort of 300 ml.
For sure, but it's not about that. It's about the tricking of the consumer.
The tricking, exactly.
It's the tricking of the consumer. You know, another one that I hate are cookies or biscuits that say vegan and gluten-free.
Yeah.
And of course, if you've heard that, if you're trying to be health conscious, you see these labels like, oh, it's vegan and gluten-free, that must be good. But actually, something vegan and gluten-free can be way worse for your body than something with eggs and gluten. So what I tell people is, as soon as you see that kind of health halo on a food packaging, just consider it to be dessert.
Red flag.
Red flag. It's like, this is dessert. Okay, this is for pleasure, dopamine release in your brain. It's not going to be healthy for your body.
Actually, I think a good heuristic is to, whenever you see that sort of lovely dark green packaging with something that says healthy or like full of fiber, or all these different flags, that's a red flag straight away. And then you should be a lot more sort of primed to decipher exactly what is in this bar or this product or whatever. And I think protein bars are probably some of the biggest culprits. I've had a lot of people and patients in the past who had gut issues, and you sort of dig into what they're eating. And it's very, very restricted because, it might just be like brown rice or broccoli or whatever, because they're the type of people that eat a lot of these protein bars. But when you look at the ingredients of what's in these protein bars, it's a lot of emulsifiers, thickeners, things that are generally pretty bad for your gut, as well as all the refined sugars and stuff that are going to send your glucose up and down.
And another one I would say is the no added sugar label. This does not mean there's no sugar in it. This just means that the sugar was not added during the creation of the food product. It just means it was there since the beginning. So for example, an orange juice, which has as much sugar in a can as a can of Coke, can absolutely have the label no added sugar.
Yeah.
Because the sugar is from the original orange ingredient. You see what I mean? So that's one I hate, because no added sugar does not mean no sugar.
Yeah.
It can mean a whole lot of sugar.
Totally. Cool. We're basically talking about everything from the sort of assumption that keeping glucose levels flat is optimal, but there is some debate about this, isn't there? And I'm sure you're aware of some of the skeptics around whether we should even be measuring glucose and actually, our oscillations in our glucose on a day-to-day basis responsible for the sort of predisposition to type 2 diabetes and all the other complications that can occur when your average glucose level is raised over time. Why don't we discuss some of those sort of anti-glucose
I'm so happy we're having this
arguments?
conversation.
Yeah.
I love it. I think it's super
I think it's really healthy
Yeah.
to have sort of a pragmatic discussion
Absolutely.
without finger pointing,
Yeah.
to sort of like question. I mean, you're a scientist. You know that skepticism is important. Cynicism is something else. I always have this thing where it's like, you can definitely lean into the skeptics because they're there to sort of like ratify the truth. Cynics, despite the wealth of evidence to the contrary, will always be cynical. And I think there's a big difference.
What I like to say is, don't turn cynicism into inaction. Right? Like, it's great to question, but don't question and become cynical to a point where you don't even try new things.
Yeah.
Okay, so great debate, super important. So many things to cover here. I think maybe the first one we should look at is, should everybody be tracking their glucose levels if you want?
Yeah, that's definitely a good place to start.
So when I started my work 5 years ago, I was really pushing the glucose monitor thing. I was like, everybody should get one. It's amazing. It changed my life, and it's the reason I got interested in this in the first place. And then I realized I don't think that's the right line, because wearing a glucose monitor can be very confusing. The data is not simple to interpret. It's really not simple to interpret. Listen, even sometimes I'm like, what the heck is going on with this data? All those fake lows and the spikes, and I get messages from people every day like, my glucose is 86, now it's 94, do I have diabetes? People don't know how to interpret this medical data.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a good idea for everybody to slap on a glucose monitor, because it can lead to more stress and confusion than anything else. And another thing that I realized is that most people can get all the benefits from steady glucose levels without wearing a glucose monitor. If you use my hacks and you just track, like the participants in my study who were not wearing CGMs, if you just track cravings, energy, hunger, sleep, and mood, you're golden. You got it all.
Yeah.
And you'll feel the difference in your body anyway very quickly when you apply the hacks. So yeah, my view on this has changed very significantly over the past few years. Well, how are you feeling?
I feel very similar to that. I think the benefits of CGMs are certainly there for people who respond well to, what gets measured, gets managed. But I think in the same way calorie counting can tip people over into anxiety, CGMs offer the same potential downfall as well. I personally find wearing a CGM every quarter or every 6 months, for 10 days or so, just to sort of like see how I'm responding to food, I find that incredibly interesting. And I'm sort of an education level, being a medic and nutritional medicine master's student, where I can interpret some of that. Some of the stuff I can't. Some of the stuff I'm like, I don't really understand what's going on here. And I think the other thing that is really important to ensure people are aware of is, it's not always what's on your plate that can impact your glucose levels.
Stress, hydration, movement, time of the month for women.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, time of the month is very, very important. That doesn't get enough airtime either.
No.
I think, during that luteal phase, you're going to find that you're going to have more spikes regardless. And I think also the impact of emotions whilst eating can certainly have an impact on your glucose levels. So that all being said, as long as you're aware of the caveats of not everything is going to be nutritionally influenced, on your glucose levels, I think they can still offer some benefits.
And we also have to say, like, the first time you put on a glucose monitor and you see, oh my gosh, my food is actually impacting my body immediately, that is a huge aha moment.
Yeah.
And it's quite important to have that realization because it changes everything. So, I mean, there's pros and cons, right? And if you're somebody who wants to wear a glucose monitor, and this is not a plug for my work, I'm just saying, get my first book, Glucose Revolution, because it goes in depth into all the different patterns, what you see, what influences your glucose levels, because I just don't want you to put one on and become super overwhelmed and stressed out.
Totally.
So, so, I mean, and I think people can self-identify with whether tracking something is going to make them feel good or not good.
Yeah.
I also see it in myself when I wear a glucose monitor. Of course, it's motivating, but also sometimes I'm like, you know what? I just don't want to look at what this cookie did to my glucose levels. I'm I'm just going to ignore this and not look at the data because I know it's not good for my glucose. And I use the hacks to minimize the spike. But also, I don't want a machine to tell me, whoa, Jessie, you ate a cookie. I'm like, yeah, I know I ate a cookie.
Yeah,
it's okay.
In the same way, actually. So I wear an Oura ring, and I've been wearing one for about 5 years. And like full disclosure, they gifted it to me, and I love it for a number of reasons because it helps me dictate the type and the intensity of workout that I'm going to be doing in the mornings. I tend to work out every day, and I want to know that I'm well rested enough that if I'm going to do this like long endurance bike ride, it's going to be to the benefit of me rather than at the detriment because I haven't rested and recovered properly, right? But if I know I'm going out for a friend's wedding, let's say, and I'm going to be up until 2 a.m, I take this thing off because I don't want to know the impact on my sleep the following day. I'm not going to exercise the day afterwards. I know my sleep's going to be terrible. I also don't wear this when I'm on a flight either because I know exactly what's going to happen as well if it's like, a red-eye flight. So I think there's the same sort of degree of intuition and engineering that we can have around CGM use. Yeah. You need to be a lot more sort of like responsible for how you use it yourself and understand the pitfalls.
Do you ever have the situation where you wake up and you wore the Oura ring and you feel good and then you look at your data and it's like you had a terrible sleep and then your entire energy and emotion change? You're like, oh, I guess I feel awful after all.
Yeah, that has happened to me actually, where I've woken up and I'm like, I didn't feel too bad, and actually my data says something otherwise. And then I override my intuition because I'm getting much better at just leaning more into my intuition, how I feel, how my body is. Am I feeling relaxed? Do I have any aches and pains? Do I want to do something a lot more intense than what my Oura ring would otherwise dictate to me? I'm going to have the overall sort of decision on that. So again, it really depends on what kind of person you are, what kind of character.
And you can get a lot of the benefits without wearing one.
Yeah, totally.
And then I think another important point is we don't want people to over-index and only focus on glucose. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you had understood that the objective was to keep a really flat glucose curve, and that became your single focus. Well, a lot of things can actually go wrong because if you add a lot of butter or a lot of processed oils to a meal, that's going to reduce the spike of the meal because the fat is going to slow down starch breakdown. So the spike will be smaller, but it won't be better for you. Another example, if you add alcohol to a meal, the more alcohol, the more you're going to see this effect. It's going to reduce the glucose spike of the meal because alcohol messes with your liver, which is the control center for your glucose levels. So when you add wine, tequila, vodka, whatever to a meal, the glucose is going to be flatter than without the alcohol.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
And sometimes when you exercise, you will see a big spike, a big glucose spike during exercise. And that's because your muscle is releasing a bunch of glucose into your bloodstream to fuel your body is releasing a bunch of glucose into your bloodstream to fuel your muscles. So if you're focused on your glucose levels, you might think, okay, I need to add a lot of processed oils. I need to add a lot of alcohol and never exercise. So you can see the limitations. Yeah. We cannot over-index on this one metric because that's going to be detrimental. Yeah, absolutely. There's so many other things that are important.
Totally.
But I like to see glucose as a really good window through which to look at your diet, because when you study your glucose levels using my hacks, for example, a lot of other things fall into place. You eat less sugar, you eat more vegetables, you move more. So generally, we are operating in a space of things that most medical professionals would recommend, right? But with the glucose science and the visual aspect of it all, people actually make the first step.
Yeah.
And that's what I care about. What I
Yeah.
care about is behavior change. How do I encourage people to actually do something?
Yeah.
And if that's through glucose levels and showing you the graph and making it easy, then that's amazing.
Totally.
So I really disagree with medical professionals who are like super cynical. Oh, but glucose doesn't matter, blah, blah. I'm like, who cares? The outcome is that people are eating more vegetables, more protein in the morning, moving more, less addicted to sugar. Like, give me a break. This is great.
And I think the visual aspect is very important there, because in the same way, when I chat to patients, I give them a visual of what a healthy plate looks like. It doesn't necessarily mean that they need to have that visual in front of them every time they sit down to prepare a meal or order something whilst they're out. In the same way, giving them the sort of visuals of glucose and what happens when you sit down to eat a meal or when you eat certain foods doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have that every single time. Like you said right at the start, you don't need to have a CGM every moment of every day to have the same intuition around the types of foods that you should be consuming every single day. And I think context is very, very important here, because I think this is where the cynics kind of come out and like, well, you shouldn't have a glucose-centric way of looking at your diet. That's not what you're, arguing for. It's very, very easy to just be cynical about it. And I think, having a holistic idea of your diet that you talk about in the books is something that is going to be net beneficial to people.
Mm-hmm. And, for every cynical person, there's 100 doctors using my work and my visuals with their patients. So I'm like, bring on the cynics. I'm happy to have a conversation, but also we have to make sure that we're not taking so much airtime with the cynicism that we're preventing people who really need this information from making changes. Ultimately, there's 1 billion people in the world today with type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. Kids are eating 85% processed foods in the UK. We need to make a change. We need to help individuals have more information, and we need to, work with the food industry to improve products. So we can talk a little bit about the cynicism. It's fun to debate, but also let's get to work.
Yeah.
Let's get people healthier.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think there is a lot more evidence coming around the impact of oscillating glucose levels.
Oh, yeah.
Actually having the highs and the lows attenuated.
Oh, yeah.
And also
inflammation, heart disease risk, all of that.
Totally, yeah. And it is coming out steadily. And perhaps it wasn't there 4 or 5 years ago, but I think the more people are studying, particularly with the use of CGMs, that I think is pretty profound from a nutritional medicine point of view. The more information will come out about why steadying your glucose level is net a good thing.
And for example, there's a bunch of studies done in people without diabetes showing that the bigger the dip after a spike, the more hungry you're going to be before the next meal, and the more you're going to overconsume food or junk food or whatever's around you. And in my book, I talk about 300 different scientific studies that underpin all this and that show you the correlation between glucose and aging and skin and hormones and brain fog. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming and it makes sense. Blood sugar, and this is not really new. One of the first people to talk about this was Mark Hyman 15 years ago. He wrote the blood sugar solution.
Yeah.
So it's been around. People have known about blood sugar for a long time, but it needs to be so common sense now, so commonplace. Just drink water, brush your teeth, keep your glucose levels steady. That's the goal, really.
Yeah.